Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Ask an Expert. Today's topic will be virtually onboarding and integrating employees to your organization. We'll begin today with some brief introductions of myself and our special guest, the basics of virtual onboarding and some of the pain points that we've encountered and how to turn those into opportunities. Casting a vision for growth, that is employee growth within the organization, and alternative learning styles within the remote environment. The last 10 minutes will be reserved for Q&A. This is Ask an Expert after all, so feel free to utilize the Q&A feature at any time. If questions come to you during the presentation, by all means, put those in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll address those at the conclusion of the presentation. Also, this webinar is approved for one SHRM recertification credit when applied with one other Ask an Expert webinar. That activity code will be shared at the conclusion of today's event. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest, Casey Clark, CEO and founder of Cultivate Advisors. Casey has ample experience in effective virtual onboarding because he runs an advisory firm where his advisors are constantly sharing best practices recommendations with their customers, who themselves are entrepreneurs and new business owners. Several, if not all of whom, are dealing with virtual onboarding. I am Moses Balian, Senior Professional of Human Resources, HR Consulting Manager at Justworks, and your perennial host of the Ask an Expert series. Casey, welcome again to the program. This is your second time. You're an old hat now. Just for those of you who might not have met you before, can you give us a quick intro of your role and Cultivate Advisors?
Happy to do that, Moses. Glad to be here. And first off, as you know, I'm a big fan of Justworks, so really glad to be here. We've been a Justworks client for quite a while, and absolutely familiar in terms of what it takes to onboard employees. And we love that Justworks helps us through that process. So thanks for you, and for the company being what it does. At a high level, we do two things really well. One, we advise small business owners. We help them grow their organization. When I say small businesses, we're working with teams up to about 100, maybe 150 normally, and we're helping them onboard and scale the organization. Obviously, we're working on a lot of things right now around how to onboard and train new employees, as a lot of these companies we work with that are in our portfolio are growing very quickly. The second thing we do really well at is we actually build a lot of soft skill training that's used by all sizes of organizations. And when I say soft skills, I'm referring to leadership skills, training skills, communication skills, selling skills, things of that nature. And we have those types of trainings available for larger organizations. So both has us very, very busy talking about this conversation, which is onboarding in a virtual environment. It's very different than what it was a year ago. And it's been challenging, but it's also been fun.
Well, thanks for sharing some of your expertise with us today, Casey.
Yeah,
our standard disclaimer, please know this information should not be taken as legal services or tax advice. We trust that you know better. So let's move on to some virtual onboarding basics. Now, this isn't virtual onboarding 101, but virtual onboarding is something almost everyone has experienced at their organizations at this point, and it's been hard. So Casey, would you be so kind as to highlight some of the pain points we might have been experiencing and how we can best navigate those?
Well, I think a lot of us, if you've come today, you're either getting ready to maybe onboard virtually, or you have been onboarding virtually, and I'm sure some of these things will resonate with you. The first one is just the relationship building. So many cultures are established by relationships that are formed, and as new employees are coming on, how to best build those relationships has become a challenge. A lot of employees, or even yourself, you're not that excited to maybe get on another Zoom meeting, but it's so new for the new folks that are coming, and they need that relationship time. The peer-to-peer learning, so often we see organizations actually transfer most skill or the how-to through peer-to-peer relationships, not always formal training. And so that's been a big, big pain point we've seen, and then the last one that I'll share, and there's many more that I'm sure others are experiencing, but just the attrition, the fear of attrition that's coming. What we learn in pandemics and what we're seeing is that top performers are still able to move on and find other job opportunities. Lower performers, or maybe B or C players, are staying in organizations out of fear. But once it opens up and these new employees that have onboarded in, so often it can turn, and our fear is that if you don't have the relationships, if you haven't got them inside of your culture and really bought in, they're going to immediately be looking for another place of belonging when this opens up and more hiring is taking place. So just something to be very conscious of, maybe those things you haven't quite thought of, but that is a reality of what's happening in most organizations right now that people are struggling with.
Well, let's dig into relationships a little bit through
Okay.
learning and through garnering trust. So, in these relationships, it's important for workers to understand that they're not working on an island. And so the relationships help to alleviate that fear and feel more integrated into the culture. Also, how can we leverage some of those relationships to gain trust to, for example, maybe prevent some of the attrition that we fear might be hanging over our heads in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, there's several ways. I'll share a couple best practices I've seen a lot of people do and see a lot of success with. Let's start with the relationships, like you said. There is one thing that is just the water cooler conversations. If you're used to be an office, organization, and now maybe you're a remote organization and trying to figure out which one you're going to do in the future. I know a lot of people are in that environment. As you're going through this, there's this classic water cooler that got lost. These checkpoints, even just the visibility to be able to look through and see, are people being included by other employees? Are they going to lunch together? There's so many other elements that I think we've lost that we can't visualize to understand if inclusion is happening and if trust is happening. And so some things to think about is you have to try to recreate this. And it comes down to setting very, very clear expectations with the people coming in to the organization. But more importantly, it's actually setting expectations with those that are already in the organization. And I think a lot of people are missing that latter part. They're saying, hey, this is a little different, to the new folks coming in, but they're not actually explaining to the current folks how to approach this. So a couple of things that you could do to really create is, I love the reoccurring lunch. Have the new employee have to go to lunch with somebody new every week and share their lunch virtually, and set them up on a scheduled system. Train all of your employees what the expectations are, how to run that, and let somebody have the next 3 months scheduled out of a lunch where they're going to meet 12 to 15 people.
Wow.
That can go so far. It's not a hard system to put in place. And you'll find that most of your employees will probably volunteer and think that's a really cool thing that they can do. There's a lot of great speed networking software out there that's very inexpensive right now. Go grab a speed networking software for your team. I know it doesn't seem like you use that, for your internal team, but having 5 minutes on reoccurring where you meet somebody new to let your current employees build deeper relationships they haven't seen for a while. Maybe they're not on meetings together, or they just don't collaborate as much when they're not in the office. But that also allows the new folks to get a chance to introduce themselves and feel like they're a part of something more than just them and their supervisor. So those are two really easy ways to maybe build more of those peer-to-peer relationships that'll absolutely build trust.
Oh, I love that, because when you start as a new employee in an office setting, you're shaking probably 15, 20 hands on your first day. This almost has an advantage over that, because you're building deeper relationships with those same 15 people over an extended period of time. That really contributes to interdisciplinary collaboration and employee belonging. So I love that.
No, it does. And I'll give one more that's not necessarily on the relationship side, but it really does connect to something that's really important, is that we're all running around working very hard. I've heard a lot of people say, I work more in a virtual environment than I did in a non-virtual environment. That's something I've heard a lot from employees of different organizations, that, or at least within our portfolio. And one of the big messages I keep sharing is, as leaders or HR professionals or business owners, we have to be the first ones to actually make space and give budgets to create the space or environment for this to happen. And I just want to be clear, if it's solving, the relationship side, if it's solving the, how to build out the training appropriately to onboard in virtual, which I know we're going to get to in a little bit, as we're navigating through that, make sure you're giving your employees space to actually have time to go build those relationships. Because, a classic example is somebody comes in and goes, if you have any questions, reach out to me.
Right.
No one's going to reach out to you virtually with a question. It's just when they just join, it's just not going to happen. You're going to have to be proactive and create the check-ins, create those consistent conversations, and have systems in place to manage that. Don't put it on the new employee. I can just tell you, you're going to set yourself up for potential failure if you do that.
It's like the classic public speaking tactic. Don't say, do you have any questions, but what are your questions?
Yeah, it will make a difference.
So Casey, you and I, in speaking before, have talked about the idea of buyer's remorse for new employees that they might experience soon or further down the road in their virtual employee life cycle. Let's talk about casting a vision for growth to combat that. So Me as an HR professional, a common framework is the idea of the 30, 60, and 90-day plans for new hires.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that old school? Am I not on the vanguard here? Does that work? How does that fit into the virtual world?
Well, first off, 30, 60, 90 plans, everybody's using them most likely, and I'm not going to discredit them. I think there's a place for them, and it's important to continue those. And I think it can be a great expectation setting, of what performance looks like in terms of a new employee. So I think it solves a different problem, than onboarding and inclusion and making sure that people feel welcome to their culture so you can retain them and get them up to speed as fast as you can. So don't remove your 30, 60-day 90s, but I would encourage you to think about something maybe a little different and understand that there's things that are a bit more important now, because it's not all about the plans and the paper that has to be in place, right? So a couple things that I think a lot about is the pulse. What is the pulse of that employee? And what is the pulse that they're experiencing? And this is kind of a different thought, but you almost have to have project management calls with the employee to check in on how they are feeling about joining the organization. And you have to have these check-in calls way more often than 30, 60, 90 of, are they getting the training that they need? Because you're most likely doing some type of combination of shadow slash figure it out, good luck, to, watching online training, to hopefully you're not making people sit through 40 hours of Zoom training all in 1 week, but
Right.
You're going through this environment that's a lot more self-learning. And we're going to talk about learning styles a little later, I hope, because I know that's a big topic you asked me about earlier. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, think about project management discussions with your employees. And one of the things that we've done internally, we're onboarding new clients or new employees. We've done that all last 2020. We just actually had another class start this week. And we have to take our leaders and actually get them to do daily checkpoints for the first 2 or 3 weeks,
Nice.
just to kick off the day. It's the same thing as if you showed up in an office, shook hands, said hello, hung your coat if you're in somewhere cold like I am in Chicago, and then kind of go, what are we doing today? What are we focused on? And then move, right? It's amazing what that does in terms of emotional and that psyche of somebody go, I'm in this with somebody else. I'm not on an island, and I'm able to drive. And so that 30, 60, 90 you can keep, but I would encourage you to pull back and maybe have a little bit faster of a timeline in terms of those checkpoints when they're first starting. Can I share a few other elements that I think are really important outside of that 30, 60 day 90?
By all means.
Let's do it. I think one of the things that is the 30, 60, 90, if maybe you shift that perspective to call it a partnering meeting versus the 30, 60, 90. And
Okay.
the thing that you've got a slide for me on it. Perfect. The thing that I love, about partnering meetings is it has a different tonality, right? It slows down and actually digs in to the fact of, what do they want out of this relationship? So often, I find companies don't have a strong process to find things like, what's the development track this person wants? What are the skills they want to learn above and beyond their role? What is it they want to do in terms of growth opportunities within the company? What is it they're trying to do with that? A lot of times they want to understand what the potential for them is and what they're working towards. And although that can happen in a formal process, what I found prior to the virtual onboarding space was that a lot of those conversations were leveraged at lunch. They were leveraged in the copy room. They were leveraged, in group dynamics sometimes even. That's now gone. If you don't bring intentionality back to that early on, it's really hard to hook employees in this virtual space, especially folks that have joined you. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call have dealt with what I'm even dealing with. I have 15% of my team who actually hasn't met other people in person yet.
Totally.
But they work for it. It's a weird environment for those individuals. And if you just slow down and ask them how they're feeling, it's bizarre for them. It's very bizarre. So those are some of the other things I would encourage you to think about, is put that into a partnering meeting, and really slow down to understand what their growth plans are and why that's so important.
It's funny you say that. I found in the virtual environment, I only have 1 or 2 relationships with folks who have joined post-COVID. I found my group has become smaller and a little deeper, and I've really enjoyed exploring a few select relationships.
Sure.
In a more involved way, but I am missing out on some aspect of office life by not feeling part of a broader sense of community, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's real. I mean, and I think, when I think about when when you like really slow down to think about even the candidates you're bringing in now, just kind of a side tangent here. Um, I don't know if if it's a recruiter or if you're still the business owner on the call today. Maybe you're the one still recruiting, depending on the size of your business or the company you're a part of. But as you're kind of going after recruiting, you really want to start to even use assessments and lines of questioning to actually
Hmm.
ask how are they in an informal environment, because your candidate persona should have changed when you want to identify, and people aren't necessarily thinking about that attribute of I have to actually test to see how somebody will perform in a remote environment. There are people that are way more successful without that formality, and there's others that really will struggle without that formality in place of that office, around them. So just something to be mindful for those on the call to go, how are we incorporating that into our recruiting process? Because that alone can also set up your success for virtual onboarding.
There's clearly benefits of formal and informal relationships. I want to give formal relationships another shot and talk about promotional opportunities and
Okay.
how an employee's success and upward trajectory within the organization can be positively impacted by those relationships. And honestly, we don't have 3 hours, but there's definitely a DEI component here as well with respect to sponsorship and building
Yeah.
a more diverse and inclusive workforce. So how can we leverage those more formal relationships to grow the right employees?
Yeah, I think all the Gallant has done a bunch of surveys, to say what do employees want most, what do they make decisions on, and the two things that always come back and really haven't moved in the last call it 20 years, although we have a lot of generational studies. What we continue to learn is the two things are: do you like your supervisor? Do you like who you report to? That's usually number one, and then number two is what's the opportunity in the future for me? It's not usually current comp. It's usually the opportunity. Most employees are looking forward. And so when you know that those two things are the case, and you're in this virtual world where they are for sure going to feel a little bit more on the island, they're going to feel like they're in their own bubble, and sometimes feel alone. You better go all in on relationship, which we've talked about. And now the second one you're hitting on is crucial, is you better really have them locked and loaded of what they're working towards,
Hmm.
more than you would have had to in the past, right? So to slow down and go, let's build out a development plan. What are the things you want to work on? Let's make sure you understand how the org chart works and where you want to go in this organization. And I can't promise anything, but let's actually spend time with them on blue sky and keep their energy focused around the culture and the growth of this organization by focusing on the growth of them. And when they feel that from you, they're going to go to a whole other level of commitment and buy-in. And you need that level now that they're on their own, right? And so it's not about, some people will say on the call, maybe they're listening to this going, I already do that. You might, but I would just encourage you to think about the next level of really going, maybe once a month, every employee gets an hour with their supervisor just to talk about the future.
Hmm.
And that sounds like a lot of time to commit, but that 1 hour can totally shift the dynamic of your culture. And you need that type of strength and that, alignment right now, as we're still working through the virtual before we get people back into offices.
I love that model. I have two check-ins with my manager weekly. One is task and now oriented. The other is more nebulous and
Strategy, blue sky.
strategy future oriented. And I
Yeah.
really value it. I just love it. So thanks for the validation.
It creates energy. It creates energy, right? Moses, for
Right.
you? Yeah, that's what it should do.
Totally. Well, something I want to touch on is kind of give a sneak peek of the bread and butter of what Cultivate offers with respect to modules that you operate on and advise your
Yeah.
customers on. So let's talk about styles of learning, because
Okay.
learning and development professionals have been thrown to a whole new set of rules amidst COVID as much or more than anyone else. So can you tell me a little more about this adult learning module?
Yeah, well, first, let me back up. I mean, we did our first virtual training right when COVID hit, and transparently, we got our butt kicked, and we're experts, right? We're experts at training. We've done a lot of virtual training, but it was so different. And what was so different for us was this classic thing that we're hearing is people just force their employees on Zoom all day long. Eyeballs, are bugging out. People are so frustrated, and it's so much talking at you. In terms of the employee. And it's like, how do you change that? Because the reality is that most employees do not actually learn what I call analytically. They do not, that's the abstract conceptualization here on the bottom there on the model you've got. That analytical learner That's somebody who can read a PowerPoint, or they can read a book, or they can be, go through a keynote, or somebody speaking to them or facilitating to them, and they can absorb it. This environment right now, you have to take what I'm saying and abstractly put it into your world on your own account. It is hard to do. It'd be a lot easier if I was working one-on-one with each of you and slowing down and showing you exactly how it worked in your business. And we talked through your situation. It would be so much easier to implement. And so what we found is that most people are only training right now in the abstract world, and they haven't figured out a way virtually to bring in the concrete experience or the reflective styles or the active experimentation. And just to give a quick summary on what these are, the concrete is for that learner who just has to do it. They have to just go out, do it, fail. And the way to do that is join meetings with them if it's customer, focused, if it's on the back end, set up, share screen, and just spend time doing it with them. Literally, don't even say a word. Just be there while they do their tasks for an hour. That can be one of the best coaching events you can give to onboard and train. That's a good way for a concrete learner. For the reflective observation, discussion. A better tactic in virtual environment right now is not to run through a PowerPoint. You're actually better off to record a 10-minute video, send the video out, ask them to watch it in advance, and then have 3 to 5 questions you want them to think about, and come back and discuss with their group of peers going through training. So you can then create more interaction and more relationship, but it'll also help them retain the information, because that's what they're doing, right? When they go through that powerhouse training you have built to onboard your employee, the next 3 or 4 weeks, they're in the office, a lot of them meeting with all their peers, and they're able to, hey, do you actually do that? How do you do that? They don't actually just leave training and all of a sudden go, I'm a perfect employee. Right. there is this graduated approach that, I'll speak to in a second. But at the end of the day, that reflective is really important. And then the last one that I didn't speak to is the active experimentation. A lot of shadowing, a lot of role playing. Get your team involved. Don't put it all in your training department if you have one. If you're the business owner, it's a small organization. Get even, if you only have 3 employees, get your employees involved and help train. Because the more you can, it's another opportunity for them to meet more people, but more importantly, allows them to experiment. And it doesn't have to be formal training. It can be more of role playing. Hey, we taught you this. Now we're going to do some sample calls if it's sales, or now we're going to have you do some, sample in the sandbox if it's a tech account manager, and run through some scenarios together. Build their confidence, because that's what they used to do in the office. So you've got to figure out how to incorporate all 4 of those styles into the training you do, and be very, very conscious of how much time they have to work on their own versus on Zoom. So you can also manage their energy levels so they don't get drained. It's a hard freaking balance.
Yeah. I am such a huge fan of learning by teaching. And I have colleagues who are mentors to new hires and say, oh my gosh, I forgot about this, or I've been doing it this way, but I was reminded of the best practices guidance I learned when I began. So I think learning by teaching is a valuable tool. And then I really globbed onto your point about how you don't just host the training and everyone's perfect. It's not like in the Matrix when Neo's like, I know Kung Fu, right? Just upload it.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. It doesn't. Well, and I think last point I'll just share is, graduated learning. If you haven't heard that term, it's just the simple thought of, what do they have to know at what point of their journey as an employee, and really breaking that out and being outcome driven of what you need them to be able to check off the box that they're skilled at, or they understand how to do X, Y, or Z tasks at a certain timeline. And so the biggest piece of advice is, in person, you can shrink that graduated learning model much faster. But once you go to this virtual environment, you've got to extend it. You've actually got to understand you're going to have to slow down the onboarding to get people in, because they can't retain the information as fast in this environment, is what we're finding. And so just be very conscious to go back to your training plan and maybe slow it down and break it up, and let them spend more time shadowing, let them spend more time in more of that active experimentation world, and understand what that graduated learning will turn into.
Thanks, Casey. I really appreciate the presentation and your expertise today. Now, the moment we're all waiting for is we get to ask an expert. So we've had a number of questions come in already. I'm excited to move on to that. Before we do, I want to announce that we'll be sending an email to all registrants and attendees following this session with a playbook for graduated learning and key training principles. So don't worry if this felt like a lot of information. We've got the white papers for you coming right after this. And then if people wanted to go further with some of the skills, coming to have a better understanding of these different learning styles, how can they do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just threw in a link on the chat. If anyone who wants to click that, you can actually schedule a quick call with our relationship manager. Her name is Stephanie. We'll tell you a little bit about what we do, learn a little bit more about your world, and then we'll actually look to get you a couple free hours with one of our advisors who are experts at this, that can sit down and look over and help you build out your virtual training, understand how to set up your virtual employee onboarding processes. It's a lot more fun when it's more of a one-on-one environment. We do that free so you can experience working with us for a few hours. And then we'll have some other opportunities of how we can help you actually implement it. And that's where there's a value for us. But no obligation, and feel free to sign up for that. We'd love to work with you if you're a business owner or if you're an HR professional. Happy to have that conversation with you.
Thanks, Casey. Great. So check out the chat, everyone, if you're interested.
Awesome.
Our first question, actually, Casey, I'm going to take this if you don't mind, and please feel free to chime in, but it's, how do we handle I-9 processing while remote? We can't view physical documents, and we're under the impression that doing so via webcam was not valid. Has that changed? Yes, it's changed. So through March 31st, Homeland Security has extended the flexible regulations that allow I-9 documentation to be reviewed via webcam. Also, they've also expanded the definition of authorized representative so that anyone can serve as the authorized representative of the organization to verify Form I-9, but the company is on the hook for that person acting in good faith and acting correctly. Also, if you're a Justworks customer, I-9 processing is going to be a lot easier because of the technological solutions we've implemented. The entire process happens within the portal on the employer login side. The employee fills out their information, the employer validates it. And then with respect to the documentation, that always still does need to be examined. Again, there are technological solutions that Homeland Security has, the flexibility they've afforded us. So that's I-9s. Casey, pending anything else, I can go on to our next question.
We use a simple web form to capture everything, and then we do just that. We have all the information, and then we confirm and look at the image and look at the individual on the video. So,
excellent.
Yep.
Okay, Lucy asks, how do you structure these organic conversations and questions, in quotes, so that you can hold leadership or managers accountable for actually checking in with new employees?
That's a good question, Lucy. I have two things that come to mind when I think about this. So one is, again, I go back to that comment I made about you have to train your employees. So the first thing is actually to slow down and teach the skill of why is this important and what is happening, and help them get in the shoes of the other people. I think once you get that emotional connection from your current employees to understand what their new employees are probably experiencing, you're naturally going to get their buy-in, and it may not require that much accountability. So I wanted to share that first as a proactive sense. Now, in terms of actually how to manage this, again, I find that the best way to do this is when you build out your training plan, make a checkpoint in kind of a partnership plan along with it, and give them the 2 or 3 sub bullets of things that you want them to be able to check off or bring up or discuss as you kind of work through that graduated process. And then you can create a simple Google form, or if you have a project management software, whatever you're using to track this, you can now create these tasks that that your leader or whatever structure you have is checking the box. And again, that's where the value of also HR professionals or even owners getting involved to having that more quicker check-ins to go, hey, are you at where I think you're at? You should be here. Do you feel that way? Okay, great. Let's move on. Because again, you used to do that in person. You'd go by, hey, how's it going? It's been a couple of weeks. How you feeling? You've lost those quick little check-ins in the office. So those are the 2 ways I would solve that.
Thanks, Casey. I'm going to throw up our SHRM activity code for anyone that's got to bounce right at time. So that's up there on the screen now, so you can get your SHRM recertification credits. Meanwhile, let's close out with a question from Ginny, who I've worked with before. Hi, Ginny. How do you get buy-in from managers to do these check-ins? So she's constantly hearing that managers and teams are too busy for activities like this. So how do you relay the value so that we actually have that engagement?
I haven't seen a lot of people struggle on the buy-in, but I can understand if there's a time issue. So the question I would have is, do you have to go through and do a time productivity conversation to help them understand that this is a higher priority than some of the other tasks they're doing? And how much more work are they going to do when this employee leaves? Right? What's going to happen when this employee leaves or isn't bought in? How much more work are they going to be doing then? So what might be a fun exercise to do is go, great, well, let's just assume I take this employee away from you then. Now run, but you still have to get all the work done. Walk me through your schedule. And that may help them start to realize, go, what's the lesser of 2 evils? Obviously, there's a lot of scenarios of why their plans could be, so tight. But I think at the end of the day, if you slow down and explain what the other option is, this one seems pretty good, actually. And again, make it fun, like the lunch idea or the speed number. There's other ways to get those check-ins to where it's more of a culture base versus another task I have to do. So try to get creative on how to look for that as well.
So what I'm hearing is you can catch flies with honey and with vinegar. You can make it
what an analogy.
Right, and be something that they would
Yeah.
like to be doing. And also
Sure.
more work now heads off even more work down the line.
Yes, absolutely. That's fair.
Fantastic. Well, Casey, I just want to thank you again for your time, for your expertise, for telling us a little bit more about Cultivate. For anyone who didn't see the link in the chat box, that's there now. We rectified that, so please engage. Appreciate you being the first repeat host of Saturday night. Of Ask an Expert.
I'll take it.
It's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me. It was a bunch of fun, and everybody that's in the virtual space, hang in there. It's getting better. We're figuring it out. We're all working together. No one is doing it perfect.
Hey, Casey, my stage manager just let me know we can keep going over for anyone who's like really into this and wants to do another question. So can I throw one more at you?
Sure, throw away.
All right. Do you have any tips on employees being overwhelmed by pop-up meetings that pepper in throughout the day and don't have enough time to focus on their deep work? She says this is sometimes employee-specific and team-specific. How do we drive this company-wide? So pop-ups, distractions during the day, deep work while still being able to foster relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the term pop-up meetings, but I haven't, dove too deep to make sure I'm really clear on the definition of that. I'm going to assume that what she means when she says pop-up meetings is that the random just, hey, I need to ping you for 15 minutes. Can we jump on a call?
Yeah.
which used to be the same thing as walking in the office or coming up to your desk or whatever environment you're in and distracting you, which you deal with in the office as well, right? I would actually say there's less distractions now in the virtual world than there was. But with that means that employees now are dealing with a lot of monotony. And so they don't actually feel like they're getting any separation from their task. It's just like put their head down and work. And I think that's what leads people to feeling like they're working, they can't catch up. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is really bring block scheduling and planning as a skill set into your organization. And actually start to come up with some office hours can be a really great tactic where there's a set time that everybody is kind of naturally in the calendar setting up, slush time where those are open hours. And we have a transparent calendar system in our company, and we always encourage all companies to do that where people can visualize availability. And what we found is you have to train employees to be very smart, even if they're doing administrative tasks, to put it in their calendar and mark it unavailable because it's that important of a priority. But then other tasks that maybe aren't as important or have the ability to push, you can make those available. So the time is still open to grab the meeting. But so we find it's down to an availability issue is what we've solved on some of those elements to keep distractions down. So that's a whole other conversation. Whoever asked that should click the link because I have a lot of ideas for you and a lot of leadership elements that I would incorporate. But that's what I can share for purposes of time today.
Totally. And some of those pulling that off effectively comes down to the real nitty gritty of just operating different systems. Like I know Google and Outlook Calendar both, for example, you can set events as busy or free. And I'm a big proponent of blocking off free time so that people can see that active invitation to engage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for taking another question, Casey, CEO and founder of Cultivate Advisors. Again, I'm Moses Balian, Senior Professional of Human Resources and Justworks HR Consulting Manager. Thanks for visiting Ask an Expert. Come back next time. Be well and stay safe.